On June 23, 1985, a bomb exploded on board Air India Flight 182, killing all 329 people on board. It was the deadliest terrorist attack in Canadian history, and the worst aviation disaster in the history of India. But who was behind this horrific act of violence, and why did they do it? In this video, we will explore the events that led to the bombing, the investigation that followed, and the aftermath of this tragedy. The plane, a Boeing 747, was en route from Toronto, Canada to London. On board were 329 passengers and crew, a majority of whom were Canadians of Indian descent. During the 1970s, many Sikhs emigrated to Western Canada. By the following decade, the area around Vancouver in British Columbia had the largest population of Sikhs outside of India. The Sikh religion originated in the Punjab region of India around the end of the 15th century. With a total of 30 million practitioners, it is the world's fifth largest religion. Although Sikhs had sought Indian independence from Britain during the early part of the 20th century, they were angered when, in 1947, Punjab was split in two between Pakistan and India. Facing persecution from the Muslim majority in the west, Sikhs moved en masse to the eastern part, in India. By the early 1980s, many Sikh groups wanted to form their own independent nation, Khalistan, or Land of the Khalsa. The Sikh militant group Baba Khalsa targeted a sect of fellow Sikhs called the Nirankari. A series of murders in the Punjab led to the Indian government storming the Golden Temple of Amritsar, the Sikh holy site, in 1984, in an attempt to apprehend the group's leaders and other leading militants. The estimated 1,000 deaths led to widespread rioting by Sikhs in India. 4 months later, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was assassinated by 2 Sikh bodyguards as revenge for the attack. Back in Canada, Baba Khalsa's co-founder, a man named Talwinder Singh Parmar, was plotting his own revenge. Thousands of Sikhs in India had been killed in reprisals after the assassination of Indira Gandhi. He approached a local Sikh mechanic, a man named Inderjit Singh Rayat, asking him to build a bomb. Parmar travelled across the country, rallying Sikhs against the Indian government and organising fundraisers for Baba Khalsa. One audience was told, quote, "Get your weapons ready so we can take revenge against the Indian government." In late 1984, one police informant claimed that he had been approached by Talwinder Parmar with a suitcase containing $200,000 as payment for planting a bomb on a plane. Another man, in an attempt to reduce his sentence for theft and fraud, told both the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police of a plot to bomb an Air India flight out of Montreal. Both reports, however, were dismissed by authorities as unreliable. In April of 1985, Rayat started making inquiries about purchasing dynamite. His cover story of needing it to blow up a tree stump soon changed when he told an acquaintance that he needed it for trouble in the old country. He purchased a clock and other items from a local Radio Shack and set about making his bomb. The government, however, recorded several phone conversations between him and Parmar and placed Rayat on a terrorist watch list. On June 22nd, a man checked into Vancouver Airport under the name M. Singh for a flight to Montreal via Toronto. He asked the flight agent to check his dark brown Samsonite suitcase, but she initially refused because he was not confirmed on the flight. After threatening to walk away to get his brother, she relented and accepted the suitcase. The plane departed without Singh on board. Once the flight arrived at Montreal's Mirabel International Airport, its flight number was changed to Air India 182. After a short stopover, it departed for London's Heathrow Airport with 307 passengers and 22 crew on board. Just after 8:15 a.m. local time, Flight 182 disappeared from radar screens shortly after reporting to Shannon International Airport in the Republic of Ireland. A bomb hidden inside a suitcase in the forward cargo hold exploded while the plane was at 31,000 feet, 9,400 meters. This caused an explosive decompression that broke up the plane in mid-air. Wreckage settled in water over a mile deep off the coast of Southwest Ireland. Meanwhile, at Vancouver Airport, another unidentified man checked in a suitcase for an Air India flight bound for Bangkok, Thailand. Like his Toronto counterpart, he also did not board the flight. Instead of a plane, this bomb, however, exploded prematurely at the terminal at Tokyo's Narita International Airport. Both this and the Flight 182 bombs were intended to explode at the same time. However, the conspirators had not taken into account that Japan, unlike Canada, does not observe daylight savings time. Back off the coast of Western Ireland, efforts were made to locate the flight data recorders on the ocean floor. On July 4th, signals from the recorder's transponders were located and both were raised to the surface. The investigation linked the Air India bombing with the bombing in Tokyo, as both planes had originated from Vancouver and contained luggage without the person that had checked them in. Although no bomb parts were recovered from the ocean, the Tokyo bomb had been placed inside a Sanyo stereo tuner that had been shipped to Vancouver. The RCMP traced one sale of these tuners to Inderjit Singh Rayat. On November 6, 1985, they raided the homes of Rayat, Talwinder Singh Parmar, and two other accomplices. The authorities initially lacked enough evidence to link Rayat to either the Air India or Narita bomb attacks. He instead pled guilty to a lesser charge of possessing explosives and having an unregistered firearm in 1986, and received a fine of $2,000. Shortly thereafter, he and his family moved to the UK. 2 years later, however, Rayat was extradited back to Canada to face new charges of manslaughter. His trial began on September 18, 1990, and he was convicted on 2 counts of manslaughter and 4 explosive charges related to the Narita airport bombing. He was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment. On June 6, 2001, towards the end of his 10-year sentence, Rayat was again arrested by the RCMP and charged with murder, attempted murder, and conspiracy for the Air India bombing. 2 years later, he was convicted and sentenced to a further 5 years in jail. Rayat's legal woes continued when, in February 2006, he was charged with perjury. Charging him with 27 counts, the judge stated, quote, "I find him to be an unmitigated liar under oath. Even the most sympathetic of listeners could only conclude, as do I, that his evidence was patently and pathetically fabricated in an attempt to minimize his involvement in his crime to an extreme degree, while refusing to reveal relevant information he clearly possesses." On September 19, 2010, after a second trial, Rayat was convicted of perjury and sentenced to another 9 years in prison. Rayat was the only individual to face justice for the Air India attack. Talwinder Singh Parmar returned to India after the bombing, where he was killed in an encounter with Punjab police in 1992. Several memorials were erected to honour the victims of Air India Flight 182. Almost 40 years after the bombing, a study showed 9 out of 10 Canadians had little to no knowledge of the attack, and only 1 in 5 classified the bombing as the worst mass murder in Canadian history. November 23, 1996. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 961 is attempting to make an emergency landing off the coast of Africa. The plane has exhausted its fuel and is travelling at over 200 miles an hour. Unable to land at the nearest airport, the captain is left with only one option: landing a passenger jet with 175 people aboard in the ocean. The plane, a Boeing 767, was scheduled to fly from Addis Ababa to the Ivory Coast, with brief stopovers in Nairobi, Brazzaville, and Lagos, before reaching its final destination in Abidjan. Just 20 minutes into the flight, 3 Ethiopian men charged the cockpit and hijacked the aircraft, after taking an axe and a fire extinguisher from the cockpit. The hijackers threaten to blow up the plane if the pilots do not obey their demands. They claim there are 11 of them, when in fact there are only 3. After assaulting and forcing the first officer into the cabin, they announce to the passengers that they have a bomb, and if anyone tries to interfere, they will use it to blow up the plane. The hijackers demand that the plane be flown to Australia. However, there is a large problem with that plan. the plane does not have enough fuel for the journey. Captain Leol Abate tries to explain that they had only taken on the fuel needed for the Addis Ababa to Nairobi trip, and thus could not even make a quarter of the journey to Australia. But the hijackers do not believe him. "How can that be?" one of them replies, when the in-flight magazine states the maximum flying time of the 767 is 11 hours. Captain Abate was no stranger to hijackings. He had been hijacked twice prior, when he was forced to fly to Kenya and Sudan, respectively. He later commented, "They knew they wouldn't make it to Australia. They just wanted us to crash. They should be dead. The way they were talking, they didn't want to live." Instead of flying towards Australia, the captain followed the African coastline southward. The hijackers noticed that land was still visible and forced the pilot to steer east. Captain Abate secretly headed for the Comoros Islands, which lay midway between Madagascar and the African mainland. The plane was nearly out of fuel as it approached the island group, but the hijackers continued to ignore the captain's warnings. Out of options, the captain began to circle the area, hoping to land the plane at the Comoros' main airport. This would force the plane to land at more than 324 kilometers an hour, 201 miles an hour. With its fuel exhausted, the right engine flamed out. The hijacker briefly exited the cabin to talk with the other hijackers. Captain Abate took this opportunity to address the passengers over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your pilot. We have run out of fuel and we are losing one engine at this time. And we are expecting a crash landing, and that is all I have to say. We have already lost one engine, and I ask all passengers to react to the hijackers." Hearing this, the lead hijacker returned to the cockpit and knocked the captain's microphone out of his hand. The left engine then flamed out, forcing the 767 to glide. The cockpit voice recorder then recorded the following: "For the sake of my responsibility, at least, the passengers must know the condition. Descend it. Increase the speed further. It doesn't have any difference. Please. All the same, we are going to die. Why don't you? I thought there is no need to. For the passengers." The captain tried to make an emergency landing at Prince Said Ibrahim International Airport on Grand Comoro, but a fight with the hijackers at the last minute caused him to lose his visual point of reference, leaving him unable to locate the airport. While still fighting with the hijackers, Captain Abate tried to ditch the aircraft in shallow waters 500 yards from shore. He attempted to land parallel with the waves instead of against them, in an effort to smooth the landing. Seconds prior to contacting the water, the aircraft was banked left some 10 degrees. The left engine and wingtip struck the water first. The engine acted as a scoop and struck a coral reef, slowing that side of the aircraft quickly and causing the Boeing 767 to suddenly tilt left. The rest of the aircraft then entered the water unevenly, causing it to break apart. Except for the rear part of the airframe, the broken portions of the fuselage sank rapidly. Many passengers died because they prematurely inflated their life jackets in the cabin, causing them to be trapped inside the sinking plane. Island residents and tourists rushed to the aid of crash survivors. One tourist even recorded a video of Flight 961 crashing. She later said she'd begun taping because she believed that the 767 formed a part of an air show for tourists. Of the 175 passengers and crew members, 125 were killed, including the 3 hijackers. According to the accident report, all 6 surviving crew members, including Captain Leol Abate, and 38 passengers received serious injuries. Many of the passengers survived the initial crash, but they had either disregarded, misunderstood, or did not hear the pilot's warning not to inflate their life jackets inside the aircraft. This caused them to be pushed against the ceiling of the fuselage when the water flooded in. Between 60 and 80 passengers drowned in this way. Shortly after 7 p.m. on the evening of December 21st, 1988, a bomb exploded on board a Boeing 747 passenger flight while flying over the town of Lockerbie in Scotland. The bomb killed all 243 passengers and 16 crew on board, in what became known as the Lockerbie bombing. The plane, Pan Am Flight 103, was en route from Frankfurt, Germany to Detroit, Michigan. Large sections of the aircraft crashed in a residential street in the town, killing 11 residents. With a total of 270 fatalities, it is the largest terrorist attack in the history of the United Kingdom. Lockerbie is a small town in the region of Dumfries and Galloway in the southwest of Scotland. Located roughly 120 kilometres, 75 miles from Glasgow, and 25 kilometres or 16 miles from the English border, the town is home to just over 4,000 inhabitants. On the evening of the disaster, just after 7 p.m. local time, the plane crossed the Solway Firth at an altitude of 31,000 feet, 9,400 meters, traveling at a speed of 580 kilometers per hour, or 360 miles an hour. At 7:02, Flight 103 received its oceanic route clearance from nearby Prestwick Airport. However, this was not acknowledged by the flight crew. The flight's transponder code, or squawk, then flickered off on the radar. As a result, air traffic control attempted to make contact with the flight crew, to no avail. The cockpit voice recorder on board Pan Am Flight 103 recorded a loud noise shortly before 7:03. 5 separate echoes appeared on radar instead of the usual one, indicating a catastrophic explosion. A nearby British Airways pilot, flying near the town of Carlisle, called Scottish authorities to report that he could see a huge fire on the ground. The explosion blew a 50 centimeter or 20-inch hole in the left side of the plane's fuselage. No distress call was recorded. The explosion in the aircraft hold was magnified by the uncontrolled decompression of the fuselage, due to the large difference in pressure between the aircraft's exterior and interior. The aircraft's elevator and rudder controls were disrupted, causing the fuselage to pitch downwards and to the left. Investigators from the Department of Transport's Air Accidents Investigation Branch concluded that the nose of the plane was blown off, separating from the fuselage within 3 seconds of the explosion. It then hit the starboard number 3 engine before plummeting to the ground some distance outside the town. The rear fuselage, parts of the baggage hold, and 3 landing gear units landed at Rosebank Crescent. The fuselage, consisting of the main wing box structure, landed in Sherwood Crescent, destroying 3 homes and creating a large impact crater. The plane's fuel ignited, causing several fires, and destroyed several other houses. Investigators determined that both wings had landed in the Sherwood Crescent crater. The nose section, which had crashed into a field 4 kilometers, 2.5 miles outside of Lockerbie, contained several passengers and crew that were still strapped into their seats. A flight attendant was found alive by a farmer's wife, but died before help could be summoned. In fact, a pathologist's report concluded that at least 2 of these passengers might have survived if they had been found soon enough. In the days leading up to the bombing, 2 separate warnings had been issued. On December 5th, 16 days before the attack, a man with an Arabic accent telephoned the US Embassy in Helsinki, Finland. He stated that within the next 2 weeks, a Pan Am flight from Frankfurt to the United States would be blown up by somebody representing the Abu Nidal organization. A second warning, this time from the Palestine Liberation Organization, stated that extremists might launch terrorist attacks to undermine ongoing talks between the United States and the PLO. In the aftermath, numerous groups claimed responsibility for the attack. Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, in 2003, took responsibility for the Lockerbie bombing and paid compensation to the victims' families, though he maintained he had not ordered the attack. The wreckage of the crash was scattered over 2,000 square kilometers, or 770 square miles. The fuselage was reconstructed, revealing a 20-inch hole consistent with an explosion in the forward cargo hold. Fragments of a Samsonite suitcase believed to have contained the bomb were recovered, together with parts of a circuit board and radio cassette player used to conceal the bomb. Items of baby clothing, which were proven to be made in Malta and were thought to have come from the same suitcase, were traced to a Maltese merchant. He claimed to have sold the clothes to a man of Libyan appearance. The man Abdel Basset al-Magrahi, an alleged Libyan intelligence officer, along with another Libyan national, were charged with the bombing. In 1999, Colonel Gaddafi arranged to hand over both men to Scottish police for trial. On January 31, 2001, Magrahi was convicted of murder by a panel of 3 Scottish judges and sentenced to life in prison, but his fellow defendant was acquitted. In a highly controversial move, he was released from prison on compassionate grounds on August 20, 2009, due to his terminal cancer diagnosis. He died in 2012. Motive for the attack can be traced back to Libya's ongoing military confrontations with the United States, dating back to the 1980s. Pan Am, which sought compensation from the Libyan government, went bankrupt partly as a result of the attack. In 1992, a U.S. federal court found the airline guilty of willful misconduct for not implementing their new security program of searching unaccompanied luggage by hand. The airline relied upon the less effective method of X-ray screening.